My husband dragged me to the gala like it was a chore. Not a celebration, not a night to be proud of, a chore. The moment we stepped out of the car, his hand tightened around my wrist and he leaned in close, his voice low and sharp. Stay in the back tonight. Your dress is embarrassing. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because the way he kept looking over my shoulder, the way his eyes darted toward the entrance like he was waiting for something to explode, told me this night was never about my dress. It was about fear. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and polished smiles, crystal glasses clinking, laughter floating like everyone belonged there. Except me, according to my husband. Thomas Monroe straightened his jacket, scanned the room, then shoved a champagne flute into my hand without looking at me. Stand near the wall, he whispered.
Don't talk.
Don't wander. I'll handle this. Handle what? That question burned in my chest. Before I continue, let me confirm what you saw on the screen. My husband dragged me to a gala to impress the new CEO. He told me to stay in the back because my dress embarrassed him. But when the CEO arrived, he ignored my husband and walked straight to me. And if you enjoy stories where quiet women are underestimated, then please subscribe now because this story is about what happens when fear finally tells the truth. And before we go any further, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now? Now, let me tell you how this night really began. My name is Clara Monroe, and for years, I believed my husband when he said I didn't belong in rooms like this. I stayed quiet. I stayed small. I stayed exactly where he put me. But that night, something was different. Thomas wasn't proud. He wasn't confident.
He was sweating.
He checked his phone 3 times in under a minute, then glanced toward the entrance again, jaw clenched, fingers tight around his glass. Who are you waiting for? I asked softly. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in again, his breath tense. If anyone asks, you're just here with me. Nothing more. Nothing more. That word followed me as the room suddenly shifted. The music softened. Conversations dipped. Heads turned. The new owner had arrived. Andrew Whitman. I saw Thomas freeze. Not stumble. Not straighten with excitement. Freeze. His face drained of color, and for a split second, just one, I saw something I'd never seen before. Panic. Andrew Whitman entered with calm authority, greeting board members, ignoring outstretched hands, his attention drifting slowly across the room. Past investors. Past executives. Then, past my husband. Thomas extended his hand, smiling too fast, too eager. Andrew didn't take it. He didn't even look at him. Instead, his eyes kept moving.
Until they landed on me.
And when they did, the room disappeared. Because the look on Andrew Whitman's face wasn't surprise. It was recognition. And behind me, I felt my husband's grip tighten, not with anger, but with terror. The moment Andrew Whitman's eyes locked onto mine, Thomas dropped his hand like it had been burned. I felt it immediately. The shift. The way his confidence drained straight through the floor. Don't move, Thomas whispered harshly, his fingers digging into my arm again. Whatever you do, don't move. That was the second time that night he'd said it. The first time, I thought he was embarrassed. Now, I knew better. Andrew didn't rush toward me. He didn't smile. He didn't react at all. He just stood there, still, watching, like a man confirming something he'd waited decades to see. Around us, the gala continued, laughter rising and falling, servers gliding past with silver trays, unaware that something invisible had just cracked open in the middle of the room. Thomas tried to laugh it off. That's him, he muttered, forcing cheer into his voice. The new owner. Big deal, right? I didn't answer. Because my chest had tightened. Because Andrew Whitman wasn't just a name on a program. It was a name I hadn't heard spoken out loud in over 30 years. A name that lived in letters never sent. Conversations that ended too suddenly. A life that vanished without explanation. Clara, Thomas said, sharper now. Look at me. I turned. His eyes were wild. Whatever you think you know. Forget it, he hissed. That man doesn't matter anymore. That was when I understood something terrifying. Thomas knew exactly who Andrew Whitman was, and he was afraid. Andrew finally began moving, not toward me, but through the room, stopping to greet a board member, exchange a quiet word with a donor, nod politely at an investor. Each pause felt intentional, measured, like he was stretching time. I felt Thomas shift beside me, calculating. We should leave, he said suddenly.
Now.
I looked at him. Why? Because I said so. That answer used to work. Not tonight. I'm staying, I replied quietly.
His head snapped toward me.
You don't understand what you're doing. I watched Andrew from across the room, his gaze lifting just enough to check whether I was still there. I was. What don't I understand? I asked. Thomas leaned in so close his voice barely carried. You were never supposed to be seen. The words hit harder than any insult. Never supposed to be seen. Before I could respond, Andrew stopped walking. The music dipped again. And this time, he turned directly toward us. Toward me. Thomas's hand trembled at his side. Andrew took one step forward. Then another. He didn't look at my husband once. He didn't acknowledge the handshake still hovering awkwardly in the air. He walked past Thomas like he didn't exist, stopped in front of me, and spoke softly, but clearly. Clara Monroe, he said, his voice steady, emotional, unmistakably real. I've been looking for you. Thomas gasped. The room fell silent, and before I could speak, Andrew reached out and gently took my hands. The moment Andrew Whitman took my hands, Thomas let out a sound that didn't belong in a ballroom. A sharp, broken exhale. Like something inside him had just collapsed. Andrew's grip was gentle, steady, nothing like the possessive way my husband held me. His eyes searched my face, not my dress, not my posture, my face. You're real, he said quietly. I was starting to think you never were. My throat tightened. Andrew, I whispered, the name slipping out before I could stop it. That was all it took. Thomas stepped forward, forcing a laugh that cracked halfway through. Mr. Whitman, pleasure to finally meet you. Thomas Monroe. My wife seems to have mistaken you for someone else. Andrew didn't look at him, not even for a second. Instead, he nodded slightly, still holding my hands. She hasn't mistaken anything. A murmur spread through the room. Thomas's smile stiffened. I'm not sure this is appropriate. Andrew finally turned then, slowly. And when he looked at my husband, there was no anger in his eyes. Only understanding. Which was somehow worse. I know exactly who you are, Andrew said calmly. Thomas swallowed. Andrew turned back to me. May I ask you something, Clara? I nodded, my pulse loud in my ears. Do you know why I bought this company? Thomas cut in sharply. This isn't the place. Andrew raised a hand, silencing him without effort. I didn't buy it for profit. The room leaned in. I bought it, Andrew continued, because your name appeared in a sealed investigation connected to it. Thomas's face went pale. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. An investigation? Andrew nodded. 30 years ago, you disappeared. No forwarding address. No records. Every trace of you was professionally erased. Thomas laughed nervously. That's absurd. Andrew's gaze snapped back to him. You paid someone to make it absurd. A hush fell, so deep I could hear my own breath. Andrew's thumb brushed lightly against my knuckles. I didn't come here tonight to embarrass anyone, he said softly. I came to confirm something. He met my eyes. You were never lost. Thomas stepped back, bumping into a server. Andrew turned toward him again. You buried her. Gasps rippled through the room. Thomas shook his head violently. You're insane. Andrew didn't raise his voice. I have documents. Thomas's lips parted, searching for words that wouldn't come. Security shifted nearby. Andrew leaned slightly closer to me. "This doesn't have to happen here," he said. "But it will happen." I looked at my husband, at the man who told me to stay small, to stay hidden, to stay in the back. And for the first time in decades, I saw him clearly, not as my protector, but as my jailer. And as Thomas opened his mouth to protest, to deny, to threaten, Andrew spoke one final line that froze him completely. "I recognized you the moment you told her to stay out of sight." Thomas's mouth opened, then closed. The words refused to come. Around us, conversations had stopped pretending not to listen. People were frozen mid-step, eyes darting between Andrew, Thomas, and me like they'd wandered into a moment they weren't supposed to witness. "I don't know what you think you saw," Thomas finally said, his voice too loud, too brittle. "My wife doesn't like crowds. I was helping her." Andrew studied him calmly.
"No," he said.
"You were controlling the variables." Thomas laughed sharply. "This is ridiculous." Andrew nodded once. "That's what I was told too." He turned to me again, his voice softening. "Clara, do you remember the letter you wrote me? The one you never mailed?" My heart skipped. "The one about the lake." Andrew's eyes glistened. "You said if I didn't come back by Friday, you'd assume I'd chosen ambition over us." Thomas stiffened. "You disappeared that Sunday," Andrew continued. "Your parents said you'd moved on. Your phone was disconnected, and every record of you after that year was gone." Thomas snapped. "That's enough." Andrew didn't raise his voice. "You intercepted the letter." Thomas's jaw clenched. "Prove it." Andrew nodded slightly toward the edge of the room. "I already did." A woman stepped forward. Tall. Elegant. Watching this unfold with careful attention. "Vanessa Cole," Andrew said. "She handled archival audits for Monroe Holdings." Thomas's face drained of color. Vanessa cleared her throat. "I was asked to review old employee records 3 years ago," she said. "Certain names were flagged for removal." My stomach dropped. "Clara Monroe was one of them," Vanessa continued. "The instruction came directly from Thomas Monroe." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. Thomas backed away. "You're lying." Vanessa met his eyes. "You signed the authorization." Andrew looked at me again. "I didn't stop searching, Clara. I just stopped believing the lies." Security took a step closer. Thomas's voice rose, desperation seeping through. "This is a private matter." Andrew nodded. "It was..." He gestured around the ballroom. "You made it public the moment you tried to hide her." I felt something break free in my chest. Not anger. Clarity. "Is any of this true?" I asked Thomas quietly. He looked at me, really looked, and for the first time didn't answer with a lie. He said nothing. That silence told me everything. And as Andrew stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear, he said the words that made my hands tremble. "He didn't just hide you from me, Clara. He hid you from yourself." Thomas's silence was louder than any confession. I had asked him a simple question, and he couldn't answer it. Around us, the gala no longer felt elegant. The chandeliers still glowed, the music still played softly, but the illusion had shattered. People weren't pretending anymore. They were watching. Andrew didn't rush. He didn't press. He just stood there, giving the truth space to breathe. "Clara," he said gently, "there's something else you should know." Thomas snapped out of his paralysis. "You don't get to keep doing this," he hissed. "This is my wife." Andrew's eyes flicked to him briefly. "That's the problem." A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. Andrew turned back to me. "When I couldn't find you, when every trail went cold, I hired an independent investigator." My chest tightened. "And?" "He found evidence of interference," Andrew said. "Payments, shell accounts, instructions to redirect inquiries." Thomas laughed again, brittle, almost hysterical. "Anyone can fabricate that." Andrew nodded. "That's what I thought." He reached into his jacket and removed a slim folder. Until I saw who signed them. Thomas lunged forward. "You don't have the right." Security stepped between them instantly. Andrew didn't flinch. "These instructions were issued under your corporate authority," he said calmly. "The same authority you used to erase Clara's records." I felt dizzy. "Erase?" I whispered. Andrew's voice softened. "Name changes. Employment gaps. Medical files sealed under false pretenses." My knees weakened. Thomas shook his head violently. "I did it to protect you." I finally looked at him. "From what?" He opened his mouth, then stopped. Andrew answered for him. "From leaving." The words sliced through me. Andrew continued, his tone controlled but heavy. "You were isolated financially. Your opportunities narrowed. Your history blurred." Thomas shouted. "She was safe." Andrew's voice dropped. "Safety isn't freedom." The room went completely still. Vanessa Cole stepped closer again, holding another document. "There's more," she said quietly. Thomas turned on her. "Stay out of this." Vanessa met his glare. "You instructed us to flag any attempt by Clara to update personal records." I felt something inside me go cold. "You monitored me?" I asked. Thomas's eyes filled with something close to panic. "I had to." Andrew looked at him steadily. "You didn't have to marry her to cage her." A gasp escaped someone nearby. I stepped back slowly, my hands shaking, my mind racing through years of confusion, of self-doubt, of feeling smaller without knowing why. It hadn't been gradual. It had been designed. Andrew leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't about me and you. Not yet." My heart pounded. "This is about what you choose next." I looked at Thomas, at the man who told me to stay in the back, who decided what I was allowed to remember. And for the first time, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt anger, clean, focused. "Let me go," I said quietly. Thomas stared at me, stunned. And in that moment I knew, whatever happened next, there was no version of this night where I stayed hidden. Thomas didn't answer me right away, and that hesitation told me more than any denial ever could. The music in the ballroom had stopped completely now. Someone had lowered it without being asked, like the room itself sensed this wasn't a celebration anymore. It was a reckoning. "You're overreacting," Thomas finally said, his voice tight, controlled, the way he spoke when he thought calm could still save him. "This is all being twisted." Andrew didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He let Thomas speak. "Because men like my husband always reveal more when they think they're regaining control." "Clara," Thomas continued, softening his tone, turning it intimate, "you know how the world is. Powerful people don't like loose ends. I kept you safe." Safe. That word again. I looked at him slowly. "By erasing me?" A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "You're dramatizing." Andrew stepped in then, his voice steady but firm. "She's describing reality." Thomas turned on him. "You don't get to rewrite my marriage." Andrew met his glare. "You rewrote her life." Security shifted closer. Thomas noticed. His jaw tightened, and for the first time that night, his mask slipped completely. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if she'd been found?" he snapped. The question hung in the air. I felt my breath catch. "Found by who?" Thomas froze. Andrew's eyes sharpened. "That's an interesting word choice." "I meant..." Thomas stopped himself, too late. Andrew turned to me. "Clara?" "There were records sealed under emergency authority. Not corporate. Legal?" My stomach dropped. "Someone filed concerns about your mental stability," Andrew continued quietly. "Claims that you were unreliable, vulnerable, incapable of independent decisions." The room went cold. I stared at Thomas. "You said I was anxious." He looked away. Andrew went on. "Those filings made it easy to justify why you disappeared from public records." I felt dizzy, like the floor had shifted beneath me. Thomas muttered. "It was precautionary." "Against me?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Andrew took a step closer, lowering his voice so only we could hear. He didn't just hide you because he knew who I was. My heart pounded. He hid you because he knew what you were capable of without him. Thomas snapped back, desperation breaking through. This ends now. He reached for my arm. Security moved instantly, blocking him. Andrew didn't raise his voice. Do not touch her. Thomas stared at the guard, then at me, realization dawning that control had finally slipped beyond his reach. You're choosing him, he said bitterly. I shook my head. I'm choosing myself. The words felt strange on my tongue. But right. Andrew nodded once, not triumphant, respectful. And as Thomas stood there, isolated, exposed, his carefully built world unraveling in front of an audience he'd once tried to impress, I realized something chilling. This night hadn't just revealed the past. It had exposed how far he'd gone to make sure I never had a future. And whatever Andrew was about to show next was going to make it impossible for him to deny it. Thomas stood there, breathing hard, like a man realizing too late that every exit had quietly locked behind him. The guests no longer whispered. They stared. Andrew glanced toward the head of the room, then back at me. Clara, he said gently, there's one more thing you deserve to hear, and it shouldn't come from me. Thomas shook his head violently.
No.
Absolutely not. Andrew ignored him and nodded toward the side entrance. A man stepped forward. Older. Gray at the temples. Carrying a slim leather folder like it weighed more than it should. This is Robert Lane, Andrew said. He's the investigator I hired years ago. Robert stopped a few feet away from us, his eyes regretful. I was told to stop looking, Robert said quietly. Not because there were no leads, but because someone paid to close them. Thomas's voice cracked. You don't have proof. Robert opened the folder. I do. He removed a document and held it up, not for the room, but for me. 30 years ago, he said, I located Clara Monroe within 6 weeks. She hadn't disappeared. She'd been redirected.
My heart slammed.
Redirected how? Robert's jaw tightened. New records. New restrictions. Legal barriers I'd never seen used that way before. Andrew spoke softly. And whose name was on those instructions? Robert didn't hesitate. Thomas Monroe. The room erupted into gasps. Thomas staggered backward, knocking into a table. Glass shattered on the floor, no one bothering to react. I did what I had to, Thomas shouted. You were vulnerable. I took a step forward. You told me I was fragile. He snapped back, because you were. Andrew's voice cut through the chaos, sharp now. No, you needed her to believe she was. Security closed in further. Robert continued, his voice steady. I was paid again years later to confirm she was content and to close the file permanently. My stomach turned. You checked on me? Thomas looked away. Robert nodded. You weren't monitored for safety. You were monitored for compliance. The word echoed. Compliance. I felt something inside me harden, a clarity sharper than fear. Andrew looked at Thomas one last time. You didn't hide her because you loved her. Thomas shouted. I did. Andrew's reply was quiet, devastating. You hid her because you were afraid of losing her. Silence slammed down again. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and for the first time saw how small his power actually was once exposed. Let me go, I said again. This time, it wasn't a request. Thomas opened his mouth, searching for something, anything that might still tether me to him. But before he could speak, Robert added one final line that shattered what was left of Thomas's control. And for the record, the payments are still traceable. Thomas's knees buckled, and I knew whatever came next wouldn't just destroy his image. It would dismantle his entire world. The word still traceable hit Thomas like a physical blow. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself, knuckles white, eyes darting around the room as if searching for someone, anyone, who could still save him. No one moved. Not his associates. Not the investors he'd spent years charming. Not even the friends who once laughed at his jokes. They were watching him, now the way people watch a fire from a safe distance. Curious, alert, already stepping back. Andrew broke the silence first. Traceable payments mean records, he said calmly. And records mean timelines. Thomas shook his head, voice hoarse. This has gone far enough. Andrew nodded slightly. It hasn't even reached the beginning. Robert Lane stepped forward again, his tone professional, almost gentle. Mr. Monroe, once the gala ends, formal inquiries will follow. Financial, legal, corporate. Thomas laughed once, sharp and hollow. You're threatening me? Robert met his eyes. I'm informing you. I stood there, listening, my heart racing, but something inside me was strangely still. Like the storm had already passed, and I was standing in the clear space it left behind. Thomas turned to me suddenly, desperation flashing across his face. Clara, please. We can fix this. We always fix things. I looked at him. At the man who decided what I remembered, what I signed, where I stood. There is nothing left to fix, I said quietly. He stepped toward me, hands raised like surrender. I did it because I loved you. Andrew didn't interrupt. He let me answer. You did it because you were afraid, I replied. And you called it love, so you could live with it. The room felt smaller again. Vanessa Cole cleared her throat. Security, she said softly. We need to ensure Mr. Monroe doesn't leave until statements are taken. 2 guards moved forward. Thomas backed away instinctively. You can't do this here. Andrew nodded once. You did. Thomas looked around wildly, his eyes finally landing on the faces that mattered most to him. The people whose approval he'd chased for years. They wouldn't meet his gaze. One by one, they turned away. The gala had become something else entirely now. Not a celebration. A witness. Andrew turned back to me, lowering his voice. Clara, you don't have to stay for this. I took a breath. For decades, I'd been told when to leave, when to stay, when to disappear. Actually, I said, straightening my shoulders, I think I do. Thomas stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. And maybe he was. Because the woman standing in front of him wasn't hidden anymore. She was watching him fall. And choosing not to look away. The room didn't rush back into noise. It stayed suspended, like everyone was afraid to disturb what was finally being seen. Thomas stood there, boxed in by his own choices, his breathing shallow, his eyes fixed on me as if I were the last thing he could still control. You're enjoying this, he said, bitterness dripping from every word. I shook my head slowly. No, I'm understanding it. Andrew stayed a step behind me, not touching, not guiding, letting this be mine. That mattered more than I could explain. Robert Lane spoke again, calm, precise. Mr. Monroe, the first inquiry will focus on the redirection orders. The second on the payments. The third on the filings made in Clara's name. Thomas snapped. Those were protective. Robert didn't flinch. They were fraudulent. The word landed hard. Thomas's shoulders sagged, just a little, like his body finally accepted what his mind had been avoiding all night. Vanessa leaned toward one of the guards and whispered instructions. Phones came out. Names were noted. Time stamps logged. The gala, once a blur of music and champagne, had turned into documentation. Andrew glanced toward the exit, then back at me. There's something else you should hear. Now, before anyone else spins it. I nodded. He turned to Robert. Tell her. Robert opened his folder again and removed a final page. Years ago, when Thomas asked me to check in on Clara, I refused. My heart jumped. You refused? Yes, he said quietly, because by then I understood what was happening. Thomas snapped his head up. That's a lie. Robert met his eyes. I resigned instead. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. I documented everything, Robert continued. In case one day, she asked. My hands trembled as he held the page out to me. Andrew didn't touch it. He let me take it myself.
It was a short report. Clean.
Factual. Devastating. Subject is isolated, financially restricted, and unaware of external interference. Continued involvement would constitute coercion. I looked up at Thomas. You knew. He swallowed. I did what I thought was necessary. I folded the paper carefully. You did what was necessary.
For you.
Thomas laughed once, broken. You think he's different? I met his eyes, steady now. That's not the question. Andrew spoke softly. Clara doesn't need saving. Thomas scoffed. Then why are you here? Andrew answered, without hesitation. Because truth has timing. The guard stepped closer again, their presence no longer optional. Thomas looked at me one last time. If you walk away tonight, everything changes. I nodded. I know. He waited, hoping for doubt, for fear, for the old hesitation. It didn't come. I turned away from him, toward the center of the room, toward the night that had stripped everything down to what was real. And as Andrew fell into step beside me, still not touching, still giving me space, I realized something powerful. This wasn't the moment I left my husband. This was the moment he lost the right to follow. Walking away felt unreal. Not dramatic, not loud, just deliberate. Each step I took across that ballroom felt like crossing a line I'd been told my whole life not to cross. Behind me, I could feel Thomas unraveling, his voice rising, then cracking, trying to reclaim attention that was already gone. Clara, wait.
I didn't.
Andrew stayed beside me, matching my pace, not rushing, not guiding, just present. That steadiness mattered more than words. Near the exit, we stopped. Not because I hesitated, but because Andrew did. There's one more thing you should know, he said quietly. I turned to him. Thomas didn't just block people from finding you, Andrew continued. He made sure anyone who did doubted themselves. My chest tightened.
How?
Andrew glanced toward Robert, who was now speaking quietly with security. False confirmations. Planted conversations. Reports that said you were fine, settled, happy. I exhaled slowly. That's why no one ever questioned it. Andrew nodded. It's hard to fight a lie when it sounds reasonable. From across the room, a sharp voice cut through the air. You don't get to rewrite history. Thomas had broken free of the guards just enough to be heard, his face flushed, eyes wild. She chose me. She stayed. I turned back to him. I stayed, I said calmly, because I didn't know there was a door. Silence hit harder than shouting ever could. Thomas took a step forward, then stopped as security closed ranks again. Andrew spoke then, not to Thomas, but to the room. This company will cooperate fully with any inquiry related to tonight's findings. A ripple spread through the guests. Andrew added, and any retaliation against Clara Monroe will be treated as obstruction. Thomas laughed bitterly. You think you can protect her forever? Andrew looked at me before answering. She doesn't need protection anymore. I felt something settle deep inside my chest. Outside, the night air was cool, steady, grounding. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without permission. Andrew stopped just beyond the doors. I won't follow you unless you ask, he said quietly. Tonight was about truth, not pressure. I looked at him, really looked older, calmer. Still unmistakably the man I once knew, but not frozen in time. I don't know what comes next, I admitted. Andrew nodded. Neither do I. Behind us, through the glass, I could see Thomas arguing, gesturing wildly, his world shrinking by the second. I turned away from it, because whatever came next, it wasn't going to be lived in the back of any room ever again. And as Andrew opened the door to let me step into the night, I understood something clearly. This wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of my life finally moving forward, without anyone deciding where I belonged. The city outside felt different, not brighter, just honest. We stood there for a moment, the sound of traffic steady, real, grounding. Andrew didn't rush to fill the silence. He never had. That was one of the things I used to love about him. He understood that silence can be a form of respect. I meant what I said, he told me gently. I won't follow unless you ask. I nodded. I need to think. Of course. He stepped back, giving me space, and that simple act told me more than any promise ever could. I went home alone that night, not to escape, to breathe. The apartment felt strange when I walked in, like it had been holding its breath for years and was finally allowed to exhale. I set my keys down, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the couch, letting the quiet wrap around me. My phone buzzed, a message from Thomas. We need to talk. You're blowing this out of proportion. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned it face down. Another message followed. You wouldn't survive without me. That one made my hands shake. Not with fear, with recognition. I remembered all the moments he'd said similar things. Not loudly, not cruelly, just enough to make doubt feel logical. I opened my laptop instead. Typed my own name into a search bar. For the first time in decades. Nothing stopped me. There were gaps, just like Andrew said. Years where I barely existed online. Jobs that never followed me. Records that felt smudged, incomplete. It wasn't accidental. My phone buzzed again. This time, a different name, Andrew. I just wanted to say one thing, his message read. You weren't forgotten. You were protected from the truth. There's a difference. Tears blurred my vision. I typed back slowly. I don't know who I am without all the walls. His reply came quickly. Then build yourself. I'll stay out of the way. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. No rehearsed conversations. No anticipation of footsteps. No measuring my words before saying them. In the morning, sunlight poured through the window, warm and unapologetic. I made coffee and drank it standing up, looking out at the street, watching people live lives they hadn't asked permission to have. My phone buzzed again. A notification. Not a message. Thomas Monroe under internal review. Temporary suspension issued. I felt my knees weaken and sat down slowly. It was happening. Not because Andrew intervened. Not because I begged. But because the truth had finally reached daylight. I closed my eyes and let myself feel it. Not victory. Release. And as I opened them again, one thought rose clearly above all the rest. This story wasn't about the man who found me. It was about the woman who finally stopped hiding. The days that followed felt slow. Not because nothing was happening, but because everything was finally happening in the open. Emails arrived first. Careful. Formal. Words like review, assessment, temporary measures. I read them without panic, without needing Thomas to translate them for me. That alone felt unreal. I opened a new bank account in my own name. The clerk smiled politely, asked routine questions, slid papers across the counter like this was the most normal thing in the world. And maybe it was. For everyone else. When I left the bank, my phone rang again. Thomas. I didn't answer. He tried again that night, then the next morning. Voicemail stacked up, his tone shifting each time. Angry. Pleading. Confused. As if the rules had changed without his consent. I deleted them all without listening. Andrew didn't call. That mattered. Instead, I received a single email from him, short and respectful. If you'd like help correcting the record, I know people who can assist. No expectations. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then replied, Thank you. Not yet. I need to do the first steps myself. His response came almost immediately. That's exactly how it should be. That afternoon, I met Robert Lane again, not at a gala, but in a quiet office with bad coffee and honest light. He laid everything out. Timelines. Redirections. Legal shortcuts Thomas had taken that looked harmless in isolation but devastating when connected. You weren't invisible, Robert said gently. You were edited. The word stuck with me. Edited. I walked home after that meeting instead of taking a ride. I needed the movement, the reminder that my body belonged to me too. At the apartment, I opened closets I hadn't touched in years. Found boxes I didn't remember packing. Documents Thomas said were outdated or irrelevant. They weren't. That night, I did something small and enormous. I booked a one-way ticket. Not to escape. Not to disappear.
Just to go somewhere.
Just to go somewhere. By choice. I didn't tell anyone where. Not Andrew. Not Robert. Certainly not Thomas. The ticket sat quietly in my email, a small, solid reminder that movement was possible now. That I didn't need permission to exist beyond the edges of someone else's plan. 2 days later, the calls stopped. Not because Thomas had found peace, but because something else had found him. Robert called that morning. "Clara," he said gently, "they've expanded the review." My stomach tightened. "How far?" "Far enough that Thomas's access has been revoked entirely," Robert replied. "Accounts. Records. Authority." I closed my eyes. There was no relief in it, just confirmation. That afternoon, I went back to the apartment for the last time. I packed slowly, deliberately, touching each object like it belonged to a version of me I was finally allowed to thank. Photographs. Books I'd stopped reading halfway through. Clothes Thomas said didn't suit me anymore. I left most of it behind. Some things don't need to follow you forward. As I zipped the suitcase, my phone buzzed again. "Andrew." "I heard about the review," his message read. "I hope you're okay." I hesitated, then replied, "I am. For the first time, I really am." He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was only one line. "When you're ready, I'd like to hear who you've become." That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Not who I was. Not who I'd been forced to be. Who I'd become. The night before my flight, I stood on the balcony and watched the city lights flicker below, each window holding a life that belonged entirely to the person inside it. Mine finally did too. At the airport the next morning, my phone buzzed one last time with a notification. Thomas Monroe placed on administrative leave, pending formal inquiry. I didn't stop walking. I boarded the plane without looking back, settled into the seat, and felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest as the engine started. Anticipation. Not fear. Not doubt. Possibility. As the plane lifted off, the city shrinking beneath the clouds, I understood something with crystal clarity. The Gala hadn't changed my life because a man recognized me. It changed my life because I finally recognized myself. And whatever waited for me on the other side of this flight, it would meet me as someone whole. The city disappeared beneath the clouds, and with it, the version of me that had learned how to survive by shrinking. The flight was quiet. No announcements that mattered. No turbulence. Just the low, steady hum of engines carrying me somewhere I had chosen, not somewhere I was sent. When we landed, I didn't rush. I walked through the terminal slowly, noticing small things. The smell of coffee, the echo of footsteps, the way no one here knew my name or my past. That anonymity didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. I checked into a modest hotel near the water. Nothing luxurious. Nothing impressive. Just a room with large windows and enough light to remind me that space could be generous. That night, I slept without dreams. No memories chasing me. No voices correcting me. Just rest. The next morning, I woke to a message waiting on my phone. Not from Thomas. From an unfamiliar number. "Clara Monroe, this is the compliance office handling the Monroe Holdings inquiry. We need to speak with you." I stared at the screen for a long moment. This was the chapter I'd known would come, the one where truth asks to be spoken plainly. I replied with a single sentence. "I'm available." The call came an hour later. Calm voices. Direct questions. No pressure. They didn't ask me to exaggerate or perform. They only asked me to confirm timelines, behaviors, decisions Thomas had made on my behalf. For the first time, I told the story without interruption. When the call ended, I stood by the window and watched waves roll in and out, steady and patient. Truth works the same way, I realized. It doesn't crash all at once. It arrives. Again and again. Until nothing false can stand against it. Later that afternoon, I received another message. Andrew, I didn't know you left town, he wrote. I hope the air feels lighter where you are. I smiled. It does, I replied. And for once, I'm not afraid of the quiet. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, it was one line. When you come back. Dinner, no pressure? No pressure. I closed my phone and stepped outside, letting the sun warm my face, letting the breeze remind me that movement didn't require permission anymore. But as peaceful as it felt, I knew something important was still unfolding behind me. Because investigations don't move quietly forever. And Thomas's story wasn't finished being told. Not yet. The truth has a strange rhythm, slow at first, then suddenly impossible to stop. I felt it the morning my phone filled with notifications I didn't open right away. News alerts, corporate updates, names I recognized layered with words I didn't expect to see attached to them. Internal misconduct, record manipulation, extended inquiry. Thomas's world was unraveling far from me, and for once, I wasn't in the middle of the wreckage. I took a walk along the water instead, letting the wind tangle my hair, letting the sound of waves remind me that life keeps moving whether you cling to it or not. Halfway down the path, my phone rang. Andrew. I stopped walking. Hey, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I won't take much of your time, he said gently. I just wanted to let you know. They asked me to submit my records. I exhaled slowly. And I did, he replied. Everything. No edits. That mattered. I'm glad, I said quietly. There was a pause. Not awkward, thoughtful. Clara, he continued, I need you to hear something clearly. I leaned against the railing, watching the water move. I didn't come back into your life to fix it, he said. I came back because the truth deserved daylight, whether I was part of your future or not. My chest tightened. Thank you, I said. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, realizing something important. Andrew wasn't a reward at the end of this story. He was proof. Proof that my past hadn't been imagined, that the girl I used to be had been real, and that she'd been worth protecting. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and began correcting my own record, updating profiles, reclaiming work history, connecting dots that had been intentionally blurred. Each click felt like stitching myself back together. That evening, another notification arrived. Thomas Monroe officially removed from executive authority. I stared at the words until they settled. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just closure. I closed the laptop and stood by the window as the sun dipped low, painting the water in shades of gold and gray. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the next shoe to drop. I wasn't bracing. I was living. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet certainty formed. The hardest part of the story was over, but the best part hadn't even begun yet. The days after that felt steady. Not empty, steady. I started waking up early, not from anxiety, but from habit slowly rewriting itself. Morning walks became routine. Coffee tasted different when I wasn't rushing through it or apologizing for taking a break. I received an email from the compliance office confirming what I already sensed. They didn't need me anymore. They had enough. Thomas's name no longer followed mine in official correspondence. For years, everything about me had been written in relation to him. That was gone. One afternoon, I returned home, not to the apartment I'd left, but to the city that no longer felt like a cage. I unpacked slowly, choosing what to place where, deciding what deserved space. That act alone felt powerful. Choosing. That evening, Andrew and I finally met for dinner. Not at a gala. Not in a room filled with witnesses. Just a small restaurant with warm light and quiet music. He stood when I arrived, smiled, and waited for me to speak first. "I'm glad you came," he said. "So am I replied. We talked about ordinary things at first. Travel, work, the strange way time reshapes people without asking permission. He didn't rush into the past, and I didn't avoid it. Eventually, I said the thing that had been sitting in my chest all night. I don't want to rebuild my life around anyone again. Andrew nodded immediately. "I wouldn't want you to." That answer mattered more than any declaration ever could. "I'm not here to reclaim what we lost," he continued gently. "I'm here to meet who you are now." Silence settled between us. Comfortable. Honest. When dinner ended, he walked me to my car and stopped a respectful distance away. "Whatever comes next," he said, "it happens because you choose it." I smiled. As I drove home, I realized something quietly astonishing. For the first time in my adult life, love didn't feel like a negotiation. It felt like an invitation. And I wasn't in a hurry to answer, because this chapter wasn't about romance. It was about ownership of my time, my choices, my future. And as I pulled into my driveway, the thought that stayed with me wasn't about Thomas, or Andrew, or the gala at all. It was simple. I was finally living a life that didn't need to be hidden. Life has a way of testing your freedom, not with big moments, but with quiet ones. A week after dinner with Andrew, I ran into someone I used to know, a former colleague, someone who remembered me as Thomas's wife before they ever remembered my name. "Wow," she said, surprised. "I heard about what happened. You must feel relieved." Relieved wasn't the word. "I feel awake," I replied. She smiled awkwardly, unsure what to do with that answer. And that's when I realized. Freedom makes some people uncomfortable. The official notice arrived 2 days later. Thick envelope. Formal language. Final words. Findings confirmed. Violations substantiated. Proceedings ongoing. I read it once. Then again. Not to relive it, but to close it. That evening, Andrew called, his voice careful, respectful. "They reached out to me too. It's going to get public." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I know. If that makes you want distance." "It doesn't," I said gently. "But it does make me want boundaries." "Good," he replied. "I'll follow your lead." That night, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not judging, not correcting, just looking. For years, I'd adjusted myself to fit the reflection someone else preferred. Now, I didn't need to adjust anything. The news broke quietly at first. Trade publications, business forums, then louder. Headlines that used Thomas's name without mine attached to it. That mattered. No wife of. No side note. No shadow. One afternoon, I received a message from Vanessa Cole. "I wanted you to know. Speaking up cost me a lot, but I'd do it again." I typed back slowly. "It gave me my life back. Thank you." As I pressed send, I felt something settle into place. This wasn't just my story. It was a ripple. And ripples don't stop where you expect them to. That night, I walked through my neighborhood, hands in my pockets, breathing in the cool air, listening to the ordinary sounds of life continuing without permission. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't bracing. I was building. And as I unlocked my door and stepped inside, one thought stayed with me, steady and unshakable. This wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a legacy, built quietly and owned completely. The quiet after everything settled was the strangest part. Not empty, but intentional. I began noticing how much space had opened up in my days once I stopped reacting to someone else's moods, plans, and expectations. Mornings were no longer negotiations. Evenings weren't performances. I chose when to speak, and when not to. That freedom felt fragile at first, like something I might accidentally lose if I moved too fast. So, I moved slowly. I started with small decisions, rearranging the living room the way I liked it, Cooking meals I'd avoided because Thomas said they were too much effort. Calling old friends I'd quietly drifted away from without ever understanding why. Each choice stitched something back together. One afternoon, I met with the career advisor Andrew had recommended, not as a favor, not as a shortcut, but as a resource. I walked into the office alone, sat down confidently, and spoke about my experience without minimizing it. For the first time, no one interrupted. When I finished, the advisor smiled. "You've been underutilized for a long time." I laughed softly. That's one way to put it. As I left, I realized something important. I wasn't starting over. I was resuming. That night, a message came through that made my hands pause over the counter. Thomas Monroe charged with multiple counts of falsification and obstruction related to corporate records. I read it twice, then set the phone down. No rush of adrenaline. No shock. Just a quiet understanding that consequences eventually catch up to intention. Andrew called later, careful with his words. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." "Thank you," I said. "I already know." We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. After the call, I stepped onto the balcony and watched the city glow below, remembering the night of the gala. The chandeliers, the whispers, the way my life cracked open in front of strangers. It felt like a lifetime ago. I thought about the woman I'd been that night, standing in the back of the room, told not to be seen, believing that shrinking was safety. She hadn't been weak. She'd been waiting. Waiting for truth. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for the moment when silence would stop protecting the wrong person. And when that moment came, she hadn't screamed, she'd stepped forward. As I stood there, the breeze cool against my skin, another realization settled in. This story wasn't just about exposure. It was about authorship. For the first time, I wasn't living inside someone else's narrative. I was writing my own. And just as I turned to go inside, my phone buzzed again. A message I hadn't expected. From Andrew. "There's something I haven't told you yet. About why Thomas panicked the moment he saw me." My breath caught. Because suddenly, I knew there was still one truth left. And it was bigger than the gala. I stared at Andrew's message for a long moment, the city noise fading into the background. "There's something I haven't told you yet. About why Thomas panicked the moment he saw me." I typed back slowly. "Tell me." His reply didn't come immediately. When it did, it was short. Not over text. "Tomorrow. Somewhere quiet." That night, sleep came in fragments. Not fear. Anticipation. The kind that tightens your chest because you sense a truth rearranging itself before you even hear it. The next afternoon, we met at a small cafe near the river. No chandeliers. No witnesses. Just sunlight, worn wooden tables, and the sound of water moving steadily past the windows. Andrew didn't waste time. "Thomas didn't panic because I recognized you," he said quietly. "He panicked because I recognized him." I frowned. "From where?" Andrew folded his hands together. "Years ago, before I became the CEO people know now, I was part of a private consortium. We investigated internal fraud, silent takeovers, and identity manipulation." My pulse quickened. One of the cases involved a mid-level executive who altered records to erase someone from professional visibility, Andrew continued. "The goal wasn't theft. It was control." I felt cold. That executive was Thomas. Andrew nodded once. He was never charged. Evidence vanished. Witnesses withdrew. But his name stayed on a list. I swallowed. "And when you bought the company?" "I saw his name again," Andrew said. "And yours?" Connected in a way that never made sense. The room felt suddenly smaller. "That's why I watched first," he went on. "Why I tested. Why I didn't rush to you. I needed to know if he was still the same man." I thought back to the gala. The way Thomas froze. The terror in his eyes. "He knew," I whispered. Andrew nodded. He knew that if I looked closely enough, everything would come back. Silence stretched between us. Not heavy. Clarifying. "And there's more," Andrew said carefully. The sealed filings about your instability weren't just for control. They protected him legally if you ever tried to leave. I closed my eyes. For years, I'd wondered why doubt always followed me like a shadow. Why I second-guessed myself even in private. It hadn't been instinct. It had been planted. I opened my eyes again, steadier now. So, the gala wasn't an accident. No, Andrew said. It was exposure. I exhaled slowly. And now, he replied, everything that was buried is surfacing. Outside, the river moved on, unconcerned with secrets finally being told. I leaned back in my chair, letting the truth settle fully into place. Thomas hadn't just tried to hide me from the world. He'd tried to hide himself. Behind me. And that was the final piece. I stood to leave, my hands no longer shaking, my mind clear in a way it never had been before. Thank you for telling me, I said. Andrew met my eyes. Whatever you do next, it's yours. As I walked away from the cafe, one thought rose above the rest. The gala had revealed the past. The investigation had reclaimed the present. But what came next would decide how this story truly ended. The truth didn't roar into my life. It settled. Quietly. Completely. In the days that followed, I felt something unfamiliar and steady take root inside me. Not relief. Not triumph. But ownership of my mornings, my name, my choices, my future. The investigations continued without me needing to be present. Statements were taken. Records corrected. Decisions made by people whose job was to tell the truth, not bury it. For the first time, my silence wasn't used against me. It was respected. Andrew didn't push for anything more than what I was ready to give. No promises. No pressure. Just space. And honesty. That mattered more than romance ever could. One evening, as I walked along the river alone, watching the city lights reflect on the water, I thought back to the gala. The humiliation. The fear. The way I'd been told to stay in the back. As if visibility itself were dangerous. I smiled softly. Not because of what I'd gained, but because of what I'd shed. I no longer needed permission to be seen. And I understood something deeply now. It was never about the CEO finding me. It was about me finding myself. The truth didn't rescue me. It returned me to the woman I'd always been, before someone decided she was easier to control if she forgot. If you're listening to this and parts of it feel uncomfortably familiar, if someone in your life keeps you small for your own good, if your voice feels like an inconvenience, please hear this. Being hidden is not the same as being protected. Thank you for listening to my story. Before you go, tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you the longest. And if you want more stories about quiet strength, delayed justice, and women reclaiming their lives, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one, because it's never too late to step out of the back of the room and take your place in your own life.